Hello.
We're in the right place because I see you and I know it's Wednesday and this is where we're supposed to be.
We found it.
We did. So welcome to everybody else who found it. We're very glad that you are here. My name is Ann Merchant and I work for the National Academy of Sciences.
And I'm Rick Lovard, and I'm the program director of the Science and Entertainment Exchange, which is a program of the National Academy of Sciences.
And I always envy you your virtual backgrounds because you are always so on topic and you've always got the right background. And I am always in the same place in my actual background. So good for you, because I think that that's exactly what you should have. You're already, people know you're in the right place because you've got it right there. You need to just lean over just a little bit.
This way?
I don't know which way exactly.
All I can say is I like your painting, man.
Well, thank you very much. But we always have to start in the right way. By my job, of course, is to explain what the National Academy of Sciences is so that there is a little bit of context for that. And so we are a private nonprofit institution in Washington, D.C., which is very confusing because as soon as you say Washington, D.C. and you say national, and then, of course, if I also told you that our address is on Constitution Avenue, I would entirely flummox you because you would assume that we are part of the federal government. But that, of course, is not our role. We are meant to sit outside the framework of the federal government to be able to help our friends who are part of that federal system steer a good course towards science policy that is informed by expertise. And we are very, very fortunate to have probably about 6,000 or 7,000 people who volunteer as part of that infrastructure. So there are about 1,000 employees of the National Academies, and that includes Rick and myself, but the employees do not do this work by themselves. There are a number of people who are part of the study process at the institution, and those people volunteer their time, and those are the experts upon whom we depend to do the work that we do. Of course, in the last year, we've been very busy focusing a lot of our resources on the pandemic, but there's a wide variety of work that we do that is spread across the sciences, science, engineering, and medicine on a regular basis. But of course, we know that not everybody is going to read the big 400-page reports that come out of this institution, as important as those things are, and as much as they drive the work of a certain constituency. They're not for everyone. We understand that. But I always say that we sit on sort of a gold mine of information. And so if we could translate that information to broader audiences, there's something really valuable in that work. And that's, of course, a lot of what Rick and I do. And specifically, the work that the Science and Entertainment Exchange does is to get that work out through the film and the television projects that Rick is connecting our work to. So I then hand it over very gracefully to you to explain the exchange.
Yeah, so about 12 and a half years ago, the exchange opened its doors. And basically, if you are a writer, producer, studio executive, storyteller in any mass media format, and you have a question about science, you can call us at 844-NEED-SCI, or you can email us. Sachi's going to put up, I think, our email addresses for you to reach out to us. And we've done over 3,300 consults since we opened our doors and 300 live events. Some of the projects we've worked on include the Avengers movies like Infinity War, Black Panther, Captain Marvel, Songbird, and Chernobyl, the HBO show that was released last year. If you are a STEM professional and you are interested in getting involved in volunteering for the work we do, please don't hesitate to contact us. We're always looking for people to connect with storytellers and filmmakers. Now about today's event, I want to first thank MHA, as always. Incredible work, and the fact that we are on the air is a credit to you, so thank you. The whole office in DC, Courtney Sloan, Jeff Fishman, and of course my colleague in LA, Sachi Gerben. Also, I would be remiss if I did not thank our sponsors, Howard Hughes Medical Institute, who fund our event series, so they're another major reason today. Also, Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Walt Disney Company, Film Nation, Google, the Lyda Hill Foundation, Corteva, and individual donors like you. You guys, guess what? We got the coins. So if you joined at supporter level in 2021, you will be receiving one of these copper 2021 Supporter of Science coins. And we are enormously grateful for the money that you give because it goes right back into this programming as well and helps support the work we do. So thank you. Event structure today. It's going to be a really interesting conversation. I think maybe for those of you who have seen the documentary. And at the end of that conversation, there will be a time for you to ask questions. But if at any time during the conversation something sparks your interest and you want to ask a question, I will be watching. And then I'm going to get to as many questions rapid fire as I possibly can for the last like 15 minutes of the event or so. So please, if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the feed. And I think that's it for right now. Back to Anne.
Yeah, so we're going to do our little rabbit hole before we actually move over to our event. We always spend a little bit of time trying to think about what have we been thinking about, what have we been doing over the course of the week since we have last talked to you. And I was very struck from having watched Dick Johnson is Dead. There was a really lovely moment in the film where I think the line was, it's always good to have a nice bunny. And I actually have a collection of little bunnies because I have the stuffed animal that belonged to me when I was a child. So it's really old and it's indecipherable as to what kind of animal it actually was. Its name was Fuzzy Wuzzy. I did not bring Fuzzy Wuzzy because, as I say, it's no longer anything. And then I have the rabbit that was my son's that I bought for him when he was very tiny. But then in anticipation of actually one day having a grandchild, I have made this little bunny. And so I created him. He has a nice little tail. So he's a nice little bunny. So this is the bunny that I'm waiting to give to my grandchild as the nice little bunny. Because I agree, it's always nice to have a nice bunny. He has nice little pink ears. And so
that's and you did the whole thing yourself?
I did. I made him. Wow. He's very cute. At least I think he's cute. So he's got nice feet.
For this week's rabbit hole, Anne brought the rabbit.
Actual rabbit hole.
And I brought the light to see the rabbit because this is like the nerdiest thing. I just can't get over this knit cap that has an LED light in it.
It's awesome.
Comes in a ton of different colors. And if you put this, which is neon. I don't know if you can quite tell in the light now. Put this on your toddler, you're never going to lose them. Just FYI. One last quick thing, though, I want to mention. I mentioned this in my rabbit hole the other day.
Wait a minute. What about the Bluetooth thing?
Oh, well, the Bluetooth thing is also really ridiculous. Like this hat also has Bluetooth in it, so you can listen to your music while wearing your knit cap. Anyway, it's a perfect hat for walking at night. But anyway, this book, Kim Stanley Robinson is going to be on week after next. There is still time to read it if you want some extra context to the conversation for the event we're having in 2 weeks. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah. So we are really happy to be able to screen this film. I think, Rick, you've been, after being prodded by a couple of our documentary filmmaker friends, like, wait a minute, stop mentioning all these Marvel movies, for goodness sake, and talk about the fact that the Exchange actually does work with documentary filmmakers. And that is a big portfolio of what we do. It was actually working with HHMI that we, I think it's been, 5 years ago now, something like that we did our first documentary filmmakers retreat. And the retreats that we do they're smallish interactions where we usually bring together about 15 filmmakers and 15 scientists / engineers / health professionals. And we do kind of get away for a weekend, someplace, usually for our documentary filmmakers. It's in the facility that the Academy owns in Woods Hole. And so we've been very, very proud to be able to do these documentary retreats for a number of years now. And of course, Kirsten was part of that. And we're very glad that she was able to do that. And we really got to know her and got to know her work. I remember seeing camera person and saying, hey, we need to invite her to something. And so when we saw this film and actually had a chance to talk to her about the way she was thinking about time and really kind of thinking so deeply about that, we just thought this is a film that we really want to have a conversation about. So we want to introduce our three panelists. They're not even like panelists; they're just really interesting people to talk about really interesting things. But the first thing we want to do is to play the trailer. We hope that all of you have had a chance to be able to see the film, but to be able to set set the right context in case you haven't, because it's not required. We do want to be able to play the trailer, and then Rick and I will briefly come back on, do a few brief introductions, and then we're going to turn the conversation over to our three guests. So we're going to go away for a minute, and then we'll come back. So Mechi, we're going to let you play the trailer, and we're going to go away.
See you in a sec.
Just the idea that I might ever lose this man is too much to bear. He's my dad.
Let's start walking. Just start walking to me. That's fantastic.
I suggested we make a movie about him dying. He said yes.
She kills me multiple times.
Action!
The resurrected dad.
Yeah, resurrected dad.
But now it's upon us, the beginning of his disappearance.
The thing I hate most about my memory loss is that it hurts people's feelings.
You know that you woke up in the middle of the night last night. You got fully dressed. Do you remember any of that?
No.
Yeah.
What can we do about that?
I don't know.
Everybody has to sort of prepare because everybody dies.
I love life too much for that. Oh man, sweetie, your father is a wreck.
It's just inevitable and a part of who we all are.
Yeah.
The fact that he's willing to keep doing this, right?
He's doing for you with love.
He's doing it for me with love. Yeah, he'll do anything for me.
Can you just like put one arm up against the wall? Like, yeah, that's nice.
That is brutal.
All right, I'm back. Where's Ann? What happened to Ann?
Am I here?
All
All right.
It's
I'm
that
trying.
video
I'm trying. I'm trying. I'm
button
trying.
Every time gets me.
I know it's such a great trailer. And so by way of introduction, I think most of you know, we don't read CVs or do things like that, but I think we do want to say a couple of things. First of all, I guess one of the things I want to say is that, so Kirk Johnson is somebody whom I have known for a while. I was first on with a panel with Kirk, I think at the Jackson Hole Film Festival. That's how I got to know him. And Kirk is very much in our lane because he's a scientist. He's a big deal scientist. Of course, that makes total sense. And I had actually invited Kirk to a documentary filmmakers retreat first, because we oftentimes populate our scientists. And Kirk had said to me, I'm so sorry, I can't make it. I'm busy. I am a big deal scientist and I can't accept your invitation. I've got something else going on. Okay, so I moved on. And then I thought, well, here's this amazing filmmaker who did this film called Camera Person, as I said, and I invited her. And I just thought, this woman is the most amazing person I've ever met. I love her. I just love her. And then she had mentioned to me, well, I know you invited my brother to this retreat. It's too bad he couldn't come. I was like, your brother? Who's your brother? What an idiot. I mean, I can just say I'd like to introduce you to each other because I am too stupid to know that these people are actually related. So this is sort of my dream event, that I could have the two of them here because they are both the most amazing people. And now that I have seen this film and understand how amazing their father is, it is no surprise to me that this whole family is just incredible. So we are really pleased to have both of them here to not only talk about this film, but to talk about something that obviously is very deeply personal. And I think that really means a lot to us. But to be able to, I think the kind of obvious way to have approached this conversation was to have somebody come in, which is the kind of obvious way we first thought about it. Well, let's go to our Forum on Disability and Aging and get somebody from that committee. And then we thought, well, Kirsten has thought so deeply about time. And of course, Kirk is a geologist who thinks very deeply about time. And so we thought, well, let's get somebody to talk about that. And in our pre-meeting, because Spiros, who's a friend of yours, and I'm going to let you talk about him, we had this amazing conversation and said, we don't need anybody else. And Spiros, you've had so many deep conversations with him,
Yeah, well, so Spiro, you may know him as a professor at or not a professor, a researcher at Caltech, but he also is the creator of the quantum realm. So if you have seen Ant-Man, then you've seen Spiro's work and you are familiar with it. He's a very, very difficult person to define. On one of our prep calls, he said he announced himself as my second best friend. I have trouble thinking of who the first best friend really is that would rank over Spiro. He's just a wonderful person to know. He's impossible to really define, but you'll see. You'll see in a moment. He's just incredible to converse with.
And this is why we're so happy to put all of them together. But really, these are three really special, wonderful people. And we hope that you enjoy this conversation. So we're going to get out of here. We're going to let them come onto the screen and let them have this wonderful conversation.
And thank you for that amazing introduction. And because you put so much work into creating that amazing rabbit for your future grandchild, I thought I would pull a rabbit out of a hat for you. Bun Bun's just making an appearance here for all of us. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be in this conversation. Thank you so much for that crazy and brilliant introduction. Kirk, Spiros, this is kind of my dream come true, talking to both of you about Dick Johnson is Dead, because I've been thinking in non-scientific terms about time for the last, I don't know, ever, I would say. But I think one of my motivations in making this film was the loss of my own capacity to remember who my mother was before she had Alzheimer's. So Kirk and I had an extraordinary mother who was, she was born Catherine Joy Pierce, but she was known as Katie Jo, who was an exceptional person. And then she was transformed by Alzheimer's into a version of herself. And I lost my capacity to remember who she had been before. And so then when we started sort of getting the inklings that something was up with my dad, all of a sudden I just felt this sort of desperate need to see if cinema could help me sort of hold on to the memory of my dad or reconstruct my dad. But I also knew that it wasn't going to be interesting necessarily to anyone else. And so the thought was like, what could we make that would matter to other people? And that's how we sort of came up with this crazy idea to kill him over and over again in the service of loving him and trying to create a comedy out of this train wreck of a situation. So that was sort of my starting place, was just like, in some ways, like the limitations of the brain to hold on to the image of the people we love.
Yeah, this is actually, I had a chance to, first of all, I mean, it's an amazing honor to be here with the two of you. I didn't realize what big shots you were in your individual fields. Thanks, Rick. I mean, I got to watch Dick Johnson is Dead, and I loved it. I suggest if you haven't watched it, you go watch it. It'll make your day. And then I end up watching also Camera Person, which is more of a serious documentary. But what I saw in both of them is, Kirsten, you've been searching for a way to explain how time works, right? And time is very fundamental. In fact, I would say in physics, time is the most fundamental concept of them all, the one that unifies everything else. And not just from the theory of relativity, right? Where space and time have kind of related to each other and can turn into each other. But just even, from a point of view of quantum physics, which is what I study, there's just one equation to rule them all, right? Like that everything else is supposed to emerge from this one equation. And it is, according to Erwin Schrödinger, one of the fathers of quantum mechanics, it is Schrödinger evolution, right? How a quantum system evolves. And basically nobody knows where that equation comes from, right? Everything else is just this equation applied to specific instances. All of classical physics as we know it, all this stuff is just different regimes of dealing with this equation and added assumptions on top of it. And you're trying to understand basically this equation and the quantum aspect of it. And quantum means pluripotent, right? It means that you have access to perspectives and points of view that are beyond your own and are so different that you thought they were impossible, right? You thought like it's not possible for anyone else to see the same thing I'm looking at, right? And come up with a different answer, right? But quantum physics says, yes, in fact, most of the information is hiding inside of the point of view, not in the thing you're observing, which is pretty amazing, right? And then there is this transportation, right, that happens between the points of view, where a lot of the more interesting information hides into how to translate your point of view into somebody else's instead of like what you're looking at again. And it was very, I don't know, it was very touching. Like, Camera Person, I actually rewatched it last night. Again, very highly recommended. Get some tissue paper out though, because it's, it's very personal. And it was, you play with time because, from a point of view of a movie, you realize that you can mix up the frames of a movie any way you want, right? But some of the ways make more sense than others. And this is what happens to our memories as well, right? Some memories are so strong, so important to us, that they almost, even if they happened 20 years ago, they're like, they happened yesterday. There are other things that just happened like 3 days ago. We just don't even remember what we had for lunch or something like that. I find this fascinating, but I'm glad that we have Kirk here because, you can put me in my place and say, no, time is real, okay? Like I study it, I see it, I have all these things that tell me I can carbon date and all that stuff. And yeah.
It's interesting, Spiros, because Kirsten and I have been talking a lot about this thing about how memories exist or don't exist, or how you create memories. And she had this great conversation with Deepak Chopra where he's basically arguing that memories don't exist. And from what I understand, time doesn't exist either. So it's like all these things don't exist that we believe in and live all the time. And we sort of proof point them ourselves. And Kirsten and I both grew up as Seventh-day Adventists, which was a religion that was very sure that the world was 6,000 years old and that we would all live eternally. That, at the end of sometime there would be a second coming and we would be taken to a safe room for a little while, then come back to a reborn earth and we live forever. So they kind of flipped it. And I became a paleontologist where I realized that actually, no, it's just the opposite way. We don't live that long and the earth has really got a long history. But I've always had a hard time myself. Geologic time is tough for most people because when you live 60 or 70 years and I say, well, 15 million years ago, this thing happened, or 400 million years ago it happened, people have a really hard time wrapping their heads around it. And my comprehension starts to break apart into your world because I'm good with 4.6 billion years, but anything more than that kind of blows my brain. Or the fact that time isn't linear is a really tough thing. But you listen to the logic of particle physics and you're like, yeah, you can make a logical argument that time isn't what it appears to be. And I have an image I'll pop up right now, which is just the way I look at the world. It's a geologic graph. And Amici, if you can pull the image up, I'll show people what I'm talking about here. It's a graph that just shows the world as a geologist knows it. And our planet has this very peculiar way of burying its dead. And there are layers of rock on the planet, and the planet, animals come and go, plants come and go. But over time, there's layers of sediment build up, which become layers of rock. And there are places where the layers are over 35 or 40,000 feet thick. And from sort of looking at these layers and interrogating them, we've been able to build the stack of time that goes back to the beginning of the planet. And one of the coolest things that's developed over the last 50 years is our ability to directly date these with numerical dates by taking small crystals of rock that were formed in volcanoes and extracting their relative amounts of uranium and lead and basically using radioactive decay to put a numerical value on it. And it's so amazing to climb up an outcrop. And you can see on the left side are rocks full of fossils, and I'm at the very top there. You can see my rabbit's actually a jackalope. There's a dog and my friend Ray Troll and our truck. But those fossil layers, you can collect these ash beds, extract the crystals. And this experiment's been run literally hundreds of thousands of times since the 1950s. You can actually date the layers of rock with numbers. And this coherent picture of the oldest stuff at the bottom and the youngest stuff at the top shows itself to be a pattern that looks like it's real. So I spent the last 40 years basically unlearning what I learned in my first 10 years and rebuilding a construct where the planet is it's 4.6 billion years old, and you can actually go out and any rock you can pick up has its own origin story. And you put all those rocks together, you get an origin story for the planet. So I look at rocks and fossils as the memory of the planet. And it gives me a little bit of a deeper time view than Kirsten's view, but nowhere near as deep as yours. And to find this thing all looping around, to me, is really fascinating. And I find it tremendously challenging to think that the memories we have aren't real, but there's so much evidence that they are constructs. And that's why the film is so interesting, because the film is Kirsten's construct of what may or may not have happened.
Well, I love seeing like that sort of pile of sedimentation, Kirk, and I think about the timeline in the edit room. We talk about there being a timeline in the edit room, but we often sort of accumulate images or tracks of sound, and so we sort of create these piles of sedimentation in the edit room, and we're moving them around on the timeline and then going up and down on the timeline. But where I work with this incredible editor named Nels Bangerter, who likes he likes a bit of math himself. Who's he's a really deep thinker, as well as someone who loves magic tricks and sort of thinks of these possibilities in cinema. But for me, I think it's like deep, Spiros, that you can see in my work that I am struggling with time as like my basic question. And I think the combination of having a brother like this who can talk about deep time in a very real way and sort of be pulling fossils out of the earth. And then our childhood religious belief, where I really struggled with it as a kid. I was really excited and disturbed by the idea of infinity. And I was always sort of trying to figure out, like, will I have to stay the same age? If I die young and go to heaven as a 7-year-old, then will I never age? And will my parents stay the same? And, it was always billed as paradise. But the sort of paradox of all of it, of time itself, was very puzzling to me. So I love that you can see that in the work, because it's definitely been in my existence for a long time.
Yeah, it's actually, to me, it's amazing because I've been doing work with the Exchange because of Rick and Anne, and I've done some work with Marvel. But the funny thing is that filmmakers, for two different reasons, I think, have a better sense of time than even us quantum physicists, because from the first point of view, you realize that the time in a movie is a construct, right? Like you can, how many frames per second you get to display, right? How many does the audience get to experience? How fast is their neural connection, firing to be, okay, you made a little bit of a memory or something registered from the screen. But most importantly, you realize the aspect of relativity from the point of view of empathy, right? You have to occupy a particular point of view, especially in camera person, as a documentary. This is the most fascinating aspect of it, that this almost anthropological inserting yourself into the story you're trying to tell. And this is at the very foundation of quantum physics. The observer disturbs the observed. No matter how much you're trying to stop that from happening, you realize in the end that all that really exists, if there's anything we call reality, is the connections with the things we are trying to observe, right? With the things outside of us. And that's what time is. Like in my own research, trying to understand where that equation comes from. Okay, I think I hit upon something that kind of shook me to my core, which said that time is the thing relative to which we exist. First of all, time, I think most of us would agree, is the dimension along which we try to capture and label change. Okay, something more fundamental than time is change. If change is not happening, time is not passing. Okay, and we may think, well, that's not the case because maybe we don't recognize change is happening, but somebody else does. No, I really mean that from your point of view, it's a very personal concept of time, right? That's why Einstein's relativity also says that you exist in relationship not just to space, which is more intuitive to us. We just move around, and the way we're looking, right? Our coordinate system changes what we're looking at. But we can also exist in a relationship with time. And at the very mathematical foundations of quantum physics itself, you realize that, yeah, time itself is a construct that is directly related to a particular observer. And the illusion that we all have the same notion of time, which Einstein, kind of threw out in a baby version, right? And quantum physics throws out in a much deeper version, comes from the illusion that we all share points of view that along most of the dimensions internal to this point of view, we are aligned, all right? So the universe, including like time as one of the dimensions, kind of looks the same. And if I want the audience to take away anything, it's the following thing. All right, let's try to understand what time is, okay? Let's try to have a definition of it. And to have a definition of anything, you need to measure it in some way, to have a unit. And the unit of time, unlike everything else, between the East and the West and all that stuff, everyone agrees that the unit of time is a second and, milliseconds, nanoseconds, stuff like that, right? But what is a second? Like most people don't even know what a second is, right? We all know, right? It's 1/86,400 of however long it takes for the sun to go up and come back again, right? It's how many seconds in like 24 hours. And it's about something like that. And for thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands of years, we kind of, thought that that's it. That's called the ephemeris second. But it didn't cut it anymore when we became like serious scientists. We needed to understand the second more precisely, without the wobbling, of the earth going around the sun and all that other stuff. And right now there was a change that happened to the definition that is a lot more fundamental than we realized, right? The second is defined currently, right? And, this may change a little bit, but not in its essence. It is defined as 9,192,631,770, I've practiced this, okay, oscillations of an electron's movement from the lowest energy of a cesium atom, that's a special type of atom, right, between the lowest energy and the next excited energy, right? So as the electron goes up and down between these two energy levels, by the time this 9,192,000,000 blah, blah, oscillations have happened, we register 1 second. No matter what anyone else may say, and that's very important, right? Because you have now changed, a Copernican change of point of view, right? Like, the second is defined as a specific number of frames of changes happening, right? And how do we know that these oscillations happen? Every time an electron goes up and down, it poops out a photon, right? A particle of light, and then you detect that, and you have a little, right, happen on the screen. And by the time you've measured a discrete number of this 9 billion something, you say, I have 1 second. Now, here's the mind-blowing part, right? If you want to mess with time, what do you need to do? You need to mess, right, with the energy level of the cesium atoms, or you need to mess with the frequency at which like these oscillations are happening. And we know how to do that. In fact, it happens all the time when you have, for example, you're traveling towards an ambulance, it's coming towards you. The siren at the top is going at a particular frequency, independent of its speed of the vehicle, right? It doesn't even matter how you're going, it has a particular frequency. But as it's moving towards you, the relative speed is such that, right, it's additive, and it creates an apparent change in the actual frequency. So it's much faster as it's coming towards you, and then as it passes you, it slows down again, right? Attenuates that way. This actually happens with everything. And because of that, the apparent frequency change as you're moving faster through something, think special relativity right now, right? You're literally changing these frequencies and these energy spacings. And so your 1 second may be equivalent to 5 seconds for somebody else, or vice versa, right? If you get to experience, in other words, twice as many oscillations in the same amount of time as they just experienced, the original number, then in half a second, you've experienced the same time as somebody else's 1 second. You're moving through life twice as fast. Your own biology, this is at the biological level, right? Because everything is made up of these atomic, interactions, changes. You physiologically age slower. And that's something you may have seen also in Interstellar and other stuff. And that's, that was kind of like one thing I wanted the audience to take away, that time really is something that exists relative to a framework of change, relative to which we are measuring change. And I just told you, just how to count a number of like oscillations or something. Imagine, being in a completely different setting where you change your relationship not to how many frames per second you get to observe, but what types of frames. What a different movie altogether. Not that you're watching the movie at like twice the speed of somebody else. You're watching a different movie. It's a different time, right? And at some point, I believe humanity will reach the level to be able to flip between different movies at a more grand scale, not just like at a microscopic quantum scale where this happens all the time, the more macroscopic level of having quantum time.
Spiros, you're blowing our minds. So one, I feel like this like explains why Kirk, like in some ways, Kirk still has the enthusiasm of his childhood in his geologic work, like finding that, like I feel like Kirk is like forever, and I mean this is a compliment, Kirk, but that you're forever 7 years old, right? Like that and I think that is the way that you're experiencing the world in a certain way. So many things came to my mind while talking about that. One, I want to tell you, Spiros, that my dad, we were walking down the street one day and I was just trying to sort of test him how well he remembered which street we were at and whether he'd be able to find his way home on his own. And we got to a block where he was just like, I'm stumped. I have no idea which way to go. And then he said to me, it's really hard to hold on to yourself, to the idea of yourself, if you don't understand space or time anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that is what we're experiencing with dementia with our dad. Like he knows us, he knows he loves us, that he's proud of us, but he is lost in space and time. Like there's no foothold in either of those things. And we did deliberately in Dick Johnson is Dead film him in super slow motion so that maybe we could enter into his time-space continuum, so that instead of him just like looping and asking another question, what are we doing, that we could turn a few seconds into a few minutes and then, catch this expression on his face, right?
Yeah.
But then we kind of entered inside of dementia is what it felt like when we were doing it.
There's something very profound about time that goes beyond what we discussed so far. And, when I was working with Marvel on the quantum realm, because they didn't know about the quantum realm, they're like, oh, when you shrink, you go microscopic and all that stuff, what that happens. And again, the idea was that from Stan Lee and Jack Kirby point of view back then, this was cutting edge, right? Particle physics, high energy physics, the Large Hadron Collider, figuring out there's a Higgs boson. These are amazing discoveries, incredible work. And it all hinged upon the idea that in order to figure out what is really going on, we just have to zoom in space. Okay. What is really important, turns out, is to try to zoom in time. And of course, that is much harder. That is way harder. Why? Because the frequency of time itself, the relative change, the rate of change of time itself relative to what? Because everything is always relative to time, velocity, all that stuff, right? We always think of how fast you're moving in space relative to time. What if there is something more fundamental than time, right? Relative to which time can move at different rates? Well, that's, as we said, exists, and a filmmaker is actually one of the best people to understand this, right? Or a video game maker, that they're frames. And you get to decide how many frames, how many oscillations of the cesium atom's lowest energy electron you're going to call a unit of time for whatever personal reason. Because say you never understand more than 100 frames per second as a human being, right? Then you'll say, I'll put 100 frames as 1 second of experience. And I find it fascinating that the filmmakers already have a sense of this. And the next frontier, I think, of science is to try to understand energy. Okay, but I'm going to say energy beyond what spiritual leaders may say energy is, and everything is energy, all that stuff. No, energy is a very specific thing, okay? And it comes both from the quantum physics point of view and Einstein's theory of general relativity. Energy is exactly the thing that is the rate of change of time relative to change itself, okay? It's kind of weird to say rate of change of time relative to change, but it means like how many frames per second are you keeping track of? That's it. That's what energy is. And there is a prefactor, right? Like, you know, for the energy of electromagnetic waves, and this is something that goes back to de Broglie, like over 100 years ago, and to the very foundation of quantum physics itself, there's a prefactor that is tiny. It's Planck's constant, okay? Planck's constant is 6.2 something times 10 to the negative 34. This is 1 over, you know, 1 trillion billion, something like that, some insane amount. And to give you a sense, what does it mean for us to have the ability to zoom in time? It means that the energy has to be huge, right? The prefactor is so small that in order for us to be able to access like many frames per second, we need to go to orders of magnitude that we can't even fathom. Forget like billions of years and stuff like that, right? You have to zoom in time right now. And it's almost like you can see the universe happening frame by frame. What we get to experience, because you were saying your dad, like at some point was like, you had to slow down time to be able to capture the things that are happening before the next moment of, you know, more conscious time. If we were to do that, we can do about 1,000 frames per second again, because of our neurons not being able to fire any faster than that. And everything else that happens faster than that, it happens, of course, it just, we're unaware of it, right? So what do? We create proxies. We create cameras like we have one at Caltech that can capture 100 trillion frames per second.
Wow.
100 trillion frames per second, that is insane. Even create like a movie of light, taking a walk, not even, you know, just taking a walk or between, like bouncing between mirrors. And at that level, light itself splits from being a single like particle, right, a photon, and becomes wave-like. I mean, it's insane, you know? So I bring it up because we have created this beautiful illusion of a continuous time and space, simply because we are giants in both space and in time. We just didn't realize the time component was happening to us all the time. You know, that it was, we are missing most of the movie, 99.999, like 39s of the universal movie happening every second, right? We see like 1,000 frames and we miss the other like billion, trillion frames. And we try to make up a story about what happened in between.
Spiros, it's always interesting to me when, you know, physicists tackle things like time and quantum physics. You're trapped in the languages that we have, and languages are just us primates, you know, making noises at each other that we understand. So we haven't really developed language as a tool to talk about things that are unseeable or unknowable, or at least, and mathematics, of course, is its own language. But mathematics is not a language that most people speak or read very fluently. We're all, you know, I find people are about at the baseline accounting level for mathematics, so they're not really particularly fluent in the language of physicists. So I'm curious, you know, in your interactions with the filming community and movie makers, is there something there for you guys in terms of making analogies for the rest of us mortals to understand the complexity of the time-space continuum?
Yeah, I think that's why I love personally working with the Exchange and also with Hollywood and other movie makers, because, you know, people like Kirsten have found ways to visually, or, you know, audio visually, I guess, represent things that would take us years to try to put into words. And I think that's really cool, because you just get to say, this is the emotional impact this deep mathematical expression is having on me. Okay, how do you express that? Like, let me put it like very simply, and then I know Rick like is gonna get us to answer questions from the audience. But think about, even, you know, I'm a mathematical physicist, right? So I'm the worst of all worlds. Okay, I am like, I am a party pooper for the physicists, because like that's not rigorous enough. Okay, but for the mathematicians, I'm too, you know, applied, right? I care about things that come from physics. But that's actually a very powerful combination, I think, right? To be at that intersection. And because you get to see in physics a lot of things that have a lot of structure, and you're like, where did it come from? Who ordered this? Right? In mathematics, everything goes. You just get to have an axiomatic framework, right, of self-evident truths. Then you can build whatever universe you want, as long as it's self-coherent. Okay, but then soon, very modern mathematics turned back on itself and said, wait a minute, we've been preaching to the wrong people all this time. Our very foundational notion of equality, the equal sign, right? The thing that creates equations. And by the way, we don't just do arithmetic as mathematicians. I just want to let all of you know, okay, we do more than that. In fact, I haven't seen numbers in so long, I miss them, okay? Send some my way. But it's all about equations. Even as I said, Schrödinger's equation, right? Evolution is an equation between left and right hand side. Everything is supposed to be an equation. No, we realized mathematics itself was wrong for thousands of years to be thinking that way. So it wasn't just that physics was wrong to try to break things down to the little atoms, and we were severing the connections between things, right? Things that the information was flowing, right? Just by cutting it to see at the individual parts. And that's entanglement and other things. The same thing happened in mathematics. 1 + 1 is not equal to 2. It's almost never equal to 2, which is mind-blowing, right? It's at the level of politics and social justice and all that stuff. But what it is, an equality, is actually an infinite tower of equivalences. Even when you write down 1 + 1 is equal to 2, one of them is on this side of the piece of paper, the other one on that side. They don't look the same, right? What do you mean that they're equal? They're equal with respect to some level of equivalence, of being able to transform one into the other for all intents and purposes, right? In particular, framework. And yes, it's actually through movies and through the crazy stuff that you see that we cannot recreate in physical reality, but you can do with, computers and stuff now, that I get to think how come in mathematics this is there, but not in physical reality? Mm-hmm. And then I realized the answer is yet. It's not in physical reality yet. What we are doing right now, the conversation we're having, would be magic 100 years ago, right? Truly magic 150 years ago, relative to 4.6 billion years of the Earth existing. That's telepathic communication over long distances and all that stuff. And it's not magic because of science.
Well, Spiro, I want to get to as many of the audience's questions as possible. I could listen to you all night, as you know, and we have talked late into the night many times. But so the first question from the audience comes from Alana, and it's just, is there an update on your dad?
Aw, that's so nice, Alana. There sure is an update on my dad. I was just thinking, Spiros, there's a wonderful documentary editor named Louis Erskine, and he always says, I want to make films where 2 + 2 = red. But our father is now is no longer living with me and my kids and my family, but spent most of the pandemic with my brother, which was, I'll let him talk about. And then we decided together to move my dad into a dementia care facility near Kirk, where he is now. And he's just gotten his second shot and is kind of the belle of the ball in a small community of people where he's the only man. So he's getting a lot of good attention, I would say.
There's actually a second man there now, Kirsten.
There's a second man?
Yeah.
Things are about to go south.
Yeah, I know, it's going to get ugly. But he is as he is in the film, although he has the Benjamin Franklin hair and long fingernails with COVID. So we got to get to the point where we can actually check him out of the facility, because COVID doesn't let us take him out. And I can go talk to him on the porch. I saw him just a couple of days ago, and he's just happy as can be. He shows his presence, and it's amazing to compare his experience with dementia with my mother's experience. And I think it must be a different kind of dementia, because he really just seemed to have lost the space and time thing, but he has everything else. And that it must be tremendously frustrating, but for him somehow, he doesn't really express that frustration, which is amazing to me.
So Kirk, what is it like to have your sister make a quirky but personal documentary with great success about your family experience?
It's great. When she came up with the idea, she's like, I'm going to make a movie, and I'm going to kill Dad a bunch of times, and I put him in a coffin in his own church with his own friends, and have him go to his own funeral as the corpse in his own funeral. Like, I love that idea, but maybe dial it back just one step. And so we talked through a couple of the early things, but my early slight resistance to it was washed over pretty quickly, and it's been just an amazing journey. Like sitting here now with this film, on the short list for the Oscars, and just watching people's response to it. I mean, people love Dad, and Kirsten really brought to the fore how wonderful my father is. And we've always loved him dearly, but I'm like, he's just our dad. Like, everybody's got a dad, but it turns out that he's like this special guy, and the way that Kirsten has presented him has really kind of laid that out for people to see. I'm getting just endless emails from people I haven't talked to in 20 or 30 years. I'm like, I love your dad. I wish my dad was like your dad. Your dad's amazing. So it's been really refreshing, and it's also probably more than anything else made it super easy to talk about a topic that's really hard to talk about.
Kirk has been extraordinarily supportive through the process. And, I think the one exception was him saying, over my dead body, you're putting Dad in a casket in front of everyone. But he was right about that. That was not the way to go. We needed to separate that moment out from the actual memorial so that Dad could be absent, so people could experience his absence. But the thing that you were saying earlier, both of you, about translation, like how do we translate between worlds? One of the things that I feel like Camera Person taught me was that somehow there is a way to create space in a movie for everyone else to enter it and make it their own movie. And that if you trust the audience will bring their own father, their own lack of a father, their father they love, their father who didn't love them enough to the movie. I've just sort of been stunned at the few times that I've seen it in the theater. People are like crying and laughing in the first 3 minutes of the film, even before anything has happened. And I was sort of like, why is that happening? But people are they're sort of expanding their own time in relation to it, because they're bringing all of their stuff to the movie, and the movie somehow is allowing them cathartic experiences that they weren't necessarily prepared to have because of the juxtapositions of emotional energy in it. But I just think that's really interesting what you both were saying about the limitations of translating our own experience. And yet there are odd ways that somehow we can communicate stories to each other and share feeling.
So I've had a couple of questions about just where to see your movies, Kirsten, and I know Dick Johnson is Dead's on Netflix. Is Camera Person there as well?
In like a duel between Amazon Prime and Netflix, you can see Camera Person on Amazon Prime, but happily Camera Person is with the Criterion Collection also, and I totally recommend going to the Criterion channel, where they have a lot of sort of supporting material around the film, and I love being there.
So Freddie asked, was the decision to make the death scenes in the movie all sudden, sort of a deliberate choice on your part?
I love that question, Freddie, and it's something that it only occurred to me after making the film. I did have one wish that I expressed to Kirk. We really wanted to float my dad out on an ice floe and just let him slowly drift away, but then we realized it would kill him. But I think it was an unconscious choice. I think we had lived the slow death of my mother, and we knew we were going to have to live the slow death. And, we're talking about over the course of a decade, right? Death of my father. And so I think the sudden death, there's some pleasure in the sudden death of just let's get this over with. But I love also this sort of idea of in life, the lights going out quickly or it being a slow fade. And I love that that's a light metaphor. And that was something that Nels found in the film. He realized everyone was switching the light on and off in the documentary footage. My dad does it, my mom does it, my kids do it. And then when we went to sort of reveal how we had done the casket in the front of the church with the green screen, Nels came up with this brilliant solution completely intuitively to have it flicker and then fade out, which is light, right, Spiros? Like that's what light and life and death is.
Absolutely. That was amazing. And it got me, of course, a big twist at the end. Yeah.
So we have, I think, about 2 minutes left. I'm not sure if this question is going to spark a big conversation, but I thought it was kind of interesting. I thought it was an interesting question. Art asks, is time more like a lake or a river? And I know Spiro's going to have some idea on this, but I'm going to ask Kirk, what do you think of this question quickly too?
I experience it as a river. And I don't have the mind to like think of it as a lake.
I love that question so much, and I totally it's so interesting because I think of art as a river, and like that the things that people have made, I sort of find them in the river flowing by, and they help me. I sort of reach in and pull out and then put them back in. But now this question is making me realize that that river is cycling, that I can sort of dip back in and go back to a Buster Keaton movie again and again and find something new in it for myself. So maybe it's like, it's a river that really like has a lot of current. I mean, a lake that has a lot of currents in it.
So here's my quick answer. We are the river. So that's what it's going on. We are time from time's point of view, right? Time is the other half relative to which we get to experience change. It is not one-dimensional. It is maybe even infinite dimensional, just like space. It's just that we are space. We are on this half, the thing that completes us so that the full thing is timeless, right? It's static. It does not exist relative, does not evolve relative to anything else. So we are each other's rivers, right? Like it's almost like we're the river that flows into the lake. When we get to observe things, we really exist in a relationship to the other half, right? By definition, our half defines what the rest of it is. And when I say half, I mean like, when you have half of infinity, it's infinity, right? Yeah.
It's so interesting because that's always been my metaphor as an artist, like that I feel like there's this flow going on of work that matters to me. And I've always wanted to be in the river. I've always wanted to make work that would get me into the river. But now we're all good. We're all in it together. Love it.
I'm just really glad that when Spiro's speaking today, he's not very far from the liquor cabinet, because every time he answers a question. I think that's all the time we have right now. Anne, do we have one more question, or do we need to wrap?
I'm looking at my watch. I think you can do one more question.
Okay, so Kirsten and Kirk, if this isn't, if you care to comment, do you have any relationship now with your childhood faith? Is there, what was the sort of journey like there?
I'll answer really quickly, but we are both drawn back to studying it and figuring out what its pull was and what its effects are, because you start from where you start and you see the world from that perspective. And I think we both felt initially escape from it, but we both feel that we've learned so much from it that I'm forever fascinated by it, because your own origin story is your own origin story.
Yeah, and Seventh-day Adventism is so incredibly specific, and there are these sort of beautiful things built into it, like social class aspiration, that you can go from being a poor or working class family and you can become a doctor or nurse or a teacher. It has it really cares about the health of people. So I've always loved that part of it. I realize in many ways it constructed the way my brain works. And the thing that I say often is that I believed a Bible verse that said, God knows your thoughts before you think them. And I believe this has sort of been like a major part of why I am the way I am. But I also credit Seventh-day Adventism with giving me an awareness of racism very early as a child. Because of the international nature of the church, but also sort of the juxtaposition of the church's understanding of what it was and what the world was. And there was a dissonance there. And somehow in that space, I was like, wait a minute, something's going on here. And so I always feel sort of deeply grateful that somehow being a part of this religion revealed the construct of racism to me very early as a child, and which is also sort of a fundamental way that I like struggle with the world. So I've got a lot of gratitude, and like Kirk, we keep coming back to it, and it turns out that Adventists are among the longest living people in the world. So we're going to hold on to it as long as we possibly can in that dimension.
Yeah, we'll take
So
that
Spiro,
with us.
Spiro, yes or no question. Without humans to measure time, would there be time? Eugenia asks that.
Yeah, so this is the answer to the other question. Without, if you're not there to hear a tree falling, like, to you. So without you being there, without anyone being there, there is no time, there is no tree, there is nothing. And the reason is this, okay? The reason is this, because even the things that we look at each other, when we look at each other as human beings, and we're like, all right, I'm looking at you, you're there, and all that stuff. This is from our macroscopic point of view, right? The atoms that make up your face and your brain and your fingertips, they're so far apart from each other, right? Might as well just be like planets in different galaxies, okay? Only from our point of view do these things have a relationship, that they form an emergent like total that we see and we hear, and there is like thoughts coming from these, like, and there's meta constructs of language and information traveling. The tables in front of us don't exist, right? You don't ever touch anything, just electromagnetic repulsion. We just exist at such levels that we think like so egocentrically, honestly, right? And that's what I wanted to live with, if anything, that quantum physics is not a theory of physics. It is a theory of empathy. It is the ultimate theory of knowledge in many ways, right? That tells you that all the information you've ever wanted is in your relationship with somebody else, in your point of view, change your point of view relative to the thing you're trying to observe. And there is more than one way to observe it. That's it, right? And you should take that seriously.
And I think the bunny has the last word. What's the bunny's name again?
Bun Bun.
Bun Bun.
He's no Schrodinger's cat, but he's our Bun Bun.
This has been such a great conversation, and I really want to thank all of you. I mean, really, this is just, it's an amazing film, Kirsten, and we really thank you for making it, because I know why audiences laugh and cry. There's a reason for that. And part of it, of course, is you. And part of it is your father. So thank you so much for making the film. Thank you so much for being here today. And it's been a great conversation and our great honor to have all three of you. And of course, I can't wait to see what you make next.
Well, as we have learned in this process and all these processes, we are all making things together.
Exactly.
And it's just been a total joy to be here making this with you. And we'll all keep making Dick Johnson is Dead together forever.
Perfect. That sounds fantastic. And we're going to get you to Woods Hole, Kirk. So just so you know, and then I'll introduce you to an awesome filmmaker.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Don't forget to mention next week's event, Anne.
Next week's event. Oh, we have Wendy Calhoun in conversation with an amazing woman scientist, because we have a report out from the academies. I know we're maybe a week late because it's International Women's Day was this week, but we're going to be a little late to the conversation, but with some really great people. So we'll send the invitation out. You'll learn more that way. And please RSVP, because we will be back. We hope you will be also.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Bye.